StrayAllDay.com.
You're now tuned into the show where you learn the discipline to show up day after day to do the work, the confidence to put yourself out there boldly and authentically, and the mental toughness to continue showing up, doing the work, putting yourself out there even when the success you've expected to achieve has yet to be achieved. And on top of all this, you get a huge dose of personal initiative. That is the go-getter energy that moves any one of us, including yourself, to go and make things happen instead of waiting for things to happen. And then we put all this together into a series of frameworks, approaches, insights, strategies, and techniques all underneath the umbrella of one unifying philosophy that is called Work on Your Game. My name is Dre Baldwin, also known as Dre All Day, and welcome to the show. And today's topic is, we are on part 2, which is going to be, that previous episode was volume 9, this will be volume 10. My favorite books episode. I actually have a couple other episodes where I talked about books that I didn't label them this way, so this is really going to be like volume 11, 12, or 13, something like that. But we'll just call it volume 10. Great books that you should read. I already gave you enough background on this in yesterday's episode, so today we can just jump right into it and pick up where we left off on in this entry of this. This is going to be book number 5 in my list. Great books that you should read. Number 5, No BS Time Management for Entrepreneurs, written by Dan Kennedy. So Dan Kennedy is a marketing guy and business guy who's been around for a long time. His work predates the internet being the internet. He goes back to the 80s, maybe even the 70s in this game. He actually shared stages with people like Zig Ziglar and others back in their day. Dan Kennedy, as of this recording, is still alive. He's probably in his early 70s. We don't know how much longer he's going to last. He said that out of his own mouth. And he actually sold his company. He's actually sold his company more than once, but most recently sold his company to Russell Brunson of ClickFunnels fame. Russell Brunson actually came up under Dan Kennedy, going to Dan Kennedy events and learning from the guy, which is how I had always heard of Dan Kennedy, his name and his work, because he has this whole brand called No BS. So you may have seen his No BS books. They actually have these really long titles, but they're all designed, the covers are all designed in the same way, written by Dan Kennedy. But these books have been around for a long time, and he's probably done multiple editions of every one of his books. And time management is just one of the things that he talks about, but he talks about a whole lot of other things. Dan Kennedy is an author that I often gift his books to others. And I think one of the best ways to know that you really like someone as an author, or the best way to know your credibility, for lack of a better term, as an author, is how often do other people who read your book give your book to somebody else as a gift, because that's a recommendation. It's one thing if I just say this is a good book. Another thing if I go get the book and send it to you because I believe this book will help you. Dan Kennedy is a book that I've given to many folks, some of whom are listening to this right now. I've sent them Dan Kennedy books because this guy knows his stuff and it's actually very good. Dan has a very deep library of material. I have access to it. Actually, when Russell Brunson of ClickFunnels fame bought Dan Kennedy's company, they offered what they call Dan Kennedy's lifetime of work. And this is something that maybe one day I'll sell, a lifetime of work. I don't know how we're gonna package it, depending on hopefully it's a long time before a lifetime of work of mine is even for sale. But Dan Kennedy was looking at the end of the road. They sold this lifetime of work. I still have all the materials down there on the shelf from where you can't see if you're watching this on camera. And I think it was like $3,000, something like that. I bought the whole thing, invested in the whole thing. And you got access to not only a box of physical stuff, and there's a lot of stuff, very thick books of his material, because again, he predates the internet. And also a lot of his courses that he did over the years and programs and events he did, of course, they were recorded and then they put those into audio format. I have access to all of those too. Probably 100 different courses and programs and trainings that he did over the years. And I've consumed all of his stuff more than once. So I'm a big fan of Dan Kennedy, even though I came around to him way after his prime years. This book right here, of all the material I've consumed from Dan Kennedy, is to me his best thing for me. And it may not be the best for you. You need to go through all his stuff like I did. But for me, this has been the best one. Again, this book is called No BS Time Management. Now, we know that a lot of people talk about time management. I have a course called 25 Hours. It's about controlling your time. Dan Kennedy's book on No BS Time Management is a comprehensive way of managing your time, not just on a motivational level, but on a, here is tactically what you do, how you do it, and why you do it this way. And if someone gets in the way of you doing this, here's what you do to, with, and for them. And here's how you handle these things that come in. Here's how you handle these things that get in the way. Here's how you handle all these objections that you are probably having right now while you're reading my book about doing the things that I'm telling you to do. Dan Kennedy basically takes every possible, what's the word I'm looking for here? Every possible contingency that a reader could come up with as to why not to implement what he said. He tells you how to do it. He tells you what to do about it. Excuse me. He tells you how to better manage your time when you are running a business, to focus on the main thing a business is supposed to do, which is making money. And as he likes to say, making the business owners rich. So Dan Kennedy has a no BS style. He does not cuss in his books, but it's a no BS style. He does cuss, but not in the book. And in other materials of his he does, but not in the way that people cuss these days. Let's put it that. Not in the way that I cuss these days. He doesn't use profanity in that way. But this guy is a no BS, straight to the point, getting right to the heart of the matter when it comes to whatever subject he's talking about. And being that I remember him mentioning he had his first $100,000 year. It was sometime either in the 70s or early 80s, before I was even born. When he had his first $100,000 year. This guy's been in the game for a long time. He really knows his stuff. I suggest any of you who's an entrepreneur, read this book, No BS Time Management for Entrepreneurs. And after you read that one and you like it, go look up other books in the No BS series, because he has a lot. He probably got 20 or 30 of them. Next, number 6, we're talking here today about great books that you should read from my recommendation. Number 6, 10X is Easier Than 2X by Dan Sullivan and Benjamin Hardy. Now, Dan Sullivan has been in the game of, let's just call it business coaching and entrepreneurship for just about as long as Dan Kennedy has been in the game. I'm pretty sure they are familiar with each other. Their careers run very parallel, and they're close to about the same age in years, even though he feels to be a little bit younger than Dan. Dan Sullivan seems to be a little bit younger than Dan Kennedy, even though I believe Dan Sullivan is maybe almost a decade older than Dan Kennedy. He appears to be younger, probably because Dan Kennedy had a big weight and drinking problem during some earlier years that I didn't know about. He's gotten over that stuff, but I think he has diabetes to this day. I believe he said that, and he's blind in one of his eyes. So Dan Kennedy's kind of teetering on the grave. Dan Sullivan appears to be a little bit younger. Again, he feels younger, and he's a guy who I am not that familiar with his work. I know that he wrote a lot of shorter books over the years. I know this from reading this book, 10X is Easier Than 2X. 10X is Easier Than 2X is a regular length book, probably about 200 pages, that he wrote with Benjamin Hardy. Benjamin Hardy is a younger guy. He's probably in his 30s, maybe early 40s. And he's a guy who's been a writer for a long time. He was very popular on this blogging platform called, I believe it was Medium. He made himself really popular on writing long form articles and stuff like that there. And he's a guy who reached out to Dan Sullivan and said, hey, I noticed you write a lot of shorter books, but you've never written a longer book. And Dan Sullivan told Ben Hardy, and again, they did this book together, that I don't really have the patience to write a longer book. And Ben Hardy said to Dan Sullivan, well, I have the patience for writing longer books. So how about we take one of your concepts and I flesh it out into a longer book? And that book became 10X is Easier Than 2X, along with a couple others. They have actually written a couple books together. This one is probably the most, I would say probably the most popular up to this point, but I may be wrong. Maybe one of the others is more popular than this one. I really got into this one because Benjamin Hardy was on the stage speaking at the Funnel Hacking Live / ClickFunnels conference. I've cross-referenced Russell Brunson a couple times here already. That's Russell's company. They have a conference they did have a conference every year. And maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I think it was the 2023 conference, I was at, and Ben Hardy spoke there. And I saw his presentation, it was very plain language conversation and very plain language presentation that he gave. And it was very different than most of the presenters at the ClickFunnels conference. A lot of presenters at the ClickFunnels conference is a lot of bells and whistles, a lot of pomp and circumstance, a lot of hype, a lot of rah-rah. That doesn't do it for me, but I know it does it for the average person, so I understand why it's like that. That kind of stuff doesn't appeal to me. Ben Hardy stood out to me because he didn't do any of that. He came on the stage. He wasn't in any type of fancy clothing. He had on his regular t-shirt, and I think he had on jeans and some plain canvas sneakers. And he had some slides up, but he wasn't like going through slides. He would just talk a little bit. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't jumping around on the stage. He wasn't doing anything. It was just a very, very... the contrast, by the law of contrast, he really stood out from all the other speakers on the stage. And I really wanted to hear what he had to say. And on top of that, he gave a free copy of his book to everybody in the audience. So there was a copy of the book sitting on a seat all through this 5,000 seat arena. I grabbed the copy, and I mean, just the title alone is going to get your attention if you're an ambitious person. All right, 10x is easier than 2x. Who isn't going to at least open a book and see what the guy has to say? So as I was listening to his presentation, he was kind of giving some explanations of the things. Some of the things he said are things that I have said in the past, and he comprehensively was laying it out. And I said, I'm absolutely going to read this book. But it was a physical book, and I knew I wasn't going to sit and read that physical book. So what I did, even though I had a free copy of the book, and I believe I still have it down here. I'm looking. Let me see. I don't know if I still have it. I might have given it away to somebody. I think I still have that copy, the physical copy of the book, 10x is easier than 2x. But I went and bought the audio version of the book, and I've listened to the audio book of 10x is easier than 2x at least 10 times in the last year and a half. All right, since I got the free version of the book, 10x is easier than 2x, because the book is, again, similar to what I told you with Dan Kennedy's book. It's not a motivational book just telling you you can do it. No, it's not that at all, because that's not Ben Hardy's style. He is actually literally breaking down why it is easier for you to 10x what you're doing than it is to 2x what you're doing. And he explains it in strategic terms. He explains it in tactical terms. And of course, he has an illustration. He has examples of people who have actually come through programs that Dan Sullivan hosts to teach them how exactly to do this. Dan Sullivan is the creator of a company that's called Strategic Coach. And I think they're based in Chicago, but they've been around for a long time. And he has coaches who work for him and things like that. So that's where I came across this one. And that book is really good for you understanding not only the mindset behind why you can 10x what you're doing a lot easier than you can 2x it, but also tactically, what exactly do you need to do to make this work? And on top of that, giving you examples of here are people who have made it work in different fields. And it's not that you need to hear somebody who's in your exact field to figure it out. Like the people he uses as examples in the book are not people who used to play basketball and started making YouTube videos and now have a podcast and a coaching program. That's not who they are. But if you listen to the stories, the principles behind what they did, there's the parallel, and you can draw those parallels to whatever it is that you do. So of all the books that I've mentioned so far here, I think, actually, I'm looking at the rest of my list and looking at what I gave you yesterday. No BS Time Management for Entrepreneurs. I don't think I mentioned that. Book number 5. I've listened to that audio book. That might be the one that I've listened to more than this one. These are the top 2. So of every book I've listed in this 8, between yesterday's episode and today, the one I've listened to the most is probably No BS Time Management. That one I probably have listened to 15 times, and 10x is easier than 2x. This one probably 10 times. So these are the top 2 that I've listened to the most of every book I'm listing here. Even if the ones I've only read or listened to once, I'm still giving you as recommendations. So listen to all of them. So that's what I got to say about this one. Moving on, point number 7. Today's topic, once again, is more great books that you should read. The 4-Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss. Interestingly enough, this book came out, I believe, in 2007. I read it in either 2007 and 2008. And this book is relatively new. Tim Ferriss did do an updated version of it probably maybe 10 or so years later. And being that this book is relatively new and that Tim Ferriss is relatively well known, he's probably more well known than Benjamin Hardy is, especially in today's world, because Tim has a very popular podcast. I still find it interesting that often when I'm talking to audiences of entrepreneurs and I get a question like, how did you become an entrepreneur? What started you? Or I'm telling my story, I'll mention 2 specific books. One of them is Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, which is not on this list here today. The other one is The 4-Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss. And I often ask audiences, who here has not read either of those books? And often I see entrepreneurs telling me they have not read either of these books, which is appalling to me. If you're an entrepreneur, you must read Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. And if you're an entrepreneur, especially if you're doing your business online, you must read The 4-Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss. These are absolute must reads. It's like being a Christian, you never open the Bible. It doesn't make any sense. So The 4-Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss, I came across, as I said, in either 2007 or 2008. And the title alone got my attention. Okay, 4-Hour Work Week. Let's see what this guy's talking about. And the book is not really about working 4 hours a week. What the book is about is how to design your lifestyle around the work that you're doing and to make work that fits the lifestyle that you want to live, and how you can actually do it, doing it using today's technology. So again, this book was written in 2007 and is using the technology that we didn't have access to back when Robert Kiyosaki wrote Rich Dad, Poor Dad in the late 90s. So Robert Kiyosaki was talking about business in general as opposed to employment as a general frame for what the book is about. And Tim Ferriss is talking about how do you live the life that you want to live and design work that facilitates that lifestyle, as opposed to finding your work and then making your lifestyle fit the work. Instead, how do we make the work fit the lifestyle? That's what the 4-hour work week is all about. And again, that doesn't mean you got to work 4 hours a week. I certainly do not work 4 hours a week. Just recording enough material for this show every week is more than 4 hours of work for me. And that's not counting everything else that I do. So this book by Tim Ferriss is one of the main reasons why I became an entrepreneur online. So Robert Kiyosaki was, I'm going to be an entrepreneur. Tim Ferriss was, here's exactly how I'm going to do it. Now, that's the way I would describe both of those books. Robert Kiyosaki's book made me believe that I must become an entrepreneur. Tim Ferriss's book showed me how exactly I will do it. And the reason that I created my first ever product, which was called Hoop Handbook. I don't know if we have any people who remember me from the basketball days listening to the show still, but Hoop Handbook was a website that I created back in 2009 or 10. And I started selling my first training programs, which were $4.99 a piece. First 2 products I ever created that were mine that I sold were a dribbling program and a shooting program. They were $4.99 a piece. And that was a result of an experiment that Tim Ferriss laid out in his book, The 4-Hour Workweek. Now, I had told this story on many podcasts, but I wasn't sure if I remembered Tim giving this experiment in his book or if it was on his blog, because he had a very popular blog before his book came out. It's one of the reasons why his book blew up, because his blog was so popular. And then when I just reread, like maybe 3 or 4 months ago, I just reread The 4-Hour Workweek, and in it, he goes through that experiment. So it solves and answers my question: where did I get that experiment from? Was it the book or the blog? It was from the book. He gives an experiment of how you can test out a product on the internet. Now, of course, this was all for 2007, 2008, but he updates it. Again, you get the updated version of the book and the revised version, and he explains all this. So the 4-Hour Workweek introduced me to several things. First of all, this whole concept of lifestyle design, which I'd never heard of before. This whole concept of outsourcing work to people and places that you don't know and have never been, respectively, such as hiring someone in India or the Philippines or any other place to work for you on your staff, and you pay them, but you have never actually met this person in person. All right. Such as Nico and the team who do the editing for my audio of this show. We have not met in person, at least as of this recording, yet this show comes out every single day, and you hear how crisp and clean the audio is every single day and how the ads are in there every single day. That's those folks, Nico and his team over there doing that. And we have never met. And I got the idea of doing this through Tim Ferriss. In his book, he explains exactly how you can outsource and hire people who you have, who are not in the same geographical area as you, but it may make sense for you as a business owner, especially in the United States of America, because in other countries, the cost of living is not as high as it is in America, which means hiring people outside of this country can be more cost effective for you. So those are just a few of the things I got from Tim Ferriss's book. And there's a whole lot of mindset stuff around this as well, because in the entrepreneurial world, there's a lot of mindset material that you need. And if you do not have those proper mindsets installed, you will fail in business. And Tim Ferriss touches on them as much as he needs to, the same way that Ben Hardy does, same way that Dan Kennedy does. And these guys are all familiar with each other, by the way. It's not that their books are written based on the other person, but they all are familiar with each other's work in a respectful way. And it's a good reason why I like all 3 of these books. So the 4-Hour Workweek, again, is the tactical guide to how exactly can you become an entrepreneur right now. That's what this book is. Next, number 8. Today's topic, once again, is great books that you should read. This is another one of my favorite books, episodes, installments. Number 8, Are You Smart Enough to Work at Google? This book is written by William Poundstone. Now, I'll tell you something interesting about this book. I didn't really like this book that much, honestly. Keep it real. I didn't really like this book that much. But I've read many books that I didn't like that I would still recommend that you read. And here's why. You should read this book because it's for several reasons. First of all, to help you understand, especially those of you who are more leaning towards employment than entrepreneurship, and you found that's just a better lane for you, you should read this book, because this book is all about what are the kind of questions that companies like Google, which has a very competitive hiring process, what are the kind of questions they ask when they are vetting candidates to actually be employees of their company. So any of you who actually wants to be an employee and you believe that's a better lane for you than being an entrepreneur, you should read this book so you understand the kind of stuff you would have to figure out in order to get a job at a place like Google. And from what I hear, Google is a great place to work. Other companies probably have parallel systems to how they hire people. So what this book goes through is basically how Google hires people. What kind of questions do they ask, and how do they test you to find out your ability to solve problems so that they best know how you could possibly get hired and how you would do if you were hired to work at Google. Funny thing is I'm reading a book, and author William Poundstone is presenting some of the questions and challenges that get asked in the job interview for Google. I'm thinking to myself, when he asks these questions, they're like these brain tweet teaser, super logical questions that you have to be like this really analytical thinker, and not analytical like the way that I'm analytical, but analytical like on an engineering level questions that they ask. And these are the kind of things that I would not be interested in. And they say, well, they'll ask some kind of question, a convoluted question, and say, how would you answer that? And the first thing I'm thinking as I'm reading the book, I'm thinking to myself, I wouldn't fucking answer that question. I would say to the interviewer, what I'm going to do is type that into ChatGPT. I'm going to go hire somebody who can solve that problem, because I don't give a fuck about figuring out the answer to this question. That's why I should not be working at Google. But if you want to work at Google, this is the kind of question you have to actually answer. You got to come up with an answer right there on the spot while they're looking at you and waiting for you to answer the question, because whether you get the job or not is dependent on how you answer this question. So that's the interesting thing about it, because it shows you what they're looking for in these companies when they're hiring. And from what I understand from people who I know who are employed and have been trying to get employed, that you go through rounds and rounds of interviewing these days, that you can go through 8, 9, 10 rounds of interviews before you get hired at a company, especially companies where it's a very competitive process. That's crazy to me. But it seems like this is the norm these days. Any of you who works at one of these big companies that has a competitive process, this is the kind of stuff you got to go through in order to get hired in the first place, which again seems crazy to me, but it appears to be a normal thing for most people these days. So that's a good thing to know. And it's also helped you understand, all right, if you were to engage with a company like this is the way that people who work there think, or the way they have to think in order to get in the room in the first place, which is, again, insightful for me, even though this is not something I would ever do. I would never apply to work at Google now, knowing that this is what they do when they hire people, because I wouldn't make it through the first rounds. I probably wouldn't make it through the second round. The first round, probably just filling out an application. I think my application might look good enough that they call me back, but I wouldn't make it past round 2, I don't think, when it comes to anything like this. So any of you looking for employment, read this book so you have a good idea of kind of questions they're going to ask you when you go for the interview. All that said, folks, this is recap. Today's class was part 2 of our mini-series installment, My Favorite Books. Number 5, No BS Time Management for Entrepreneurs by Dan Kennedy. Number 6, 10X, It's Easier Than 2X by Dan Sullivan and Ben Hardy. Number 7, The 4-Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss. And number 8, Are You Smart Enough to Work at Google by William Poundstone. All that said, folks, make sure you engage with my Dre GPT chatbot for free by going to dreallday.com/AI and workonyourgameuniversity.com to engage with me, the actual Dre Baldwin, at workonyourgameuniversity.com. Work on your game. Dre all